I would like to welcome on stage Giuseppe Garezia from Site Improve, has been working to increase the level of web accessibility for institutions in Southern Europe, leading different projects of large scale, monitoring with governmental and central administrations. He actively promotes web accessibility and consults private companies about inclusivity.
Our second panelist is Stanley De Bono, who is the ICT Accessibility Director at Fita, and his key responsibilities include helping define strategy and the service development necessary to carry it out.
Samantha Paj-Gazan is the Commissioner for the Rights of Persons with Disability. She emphasizes the importance of unity in the sector in order to strengthen the voice of people with disability, as well as the role played by the different sectors in ensuring that people with disabilities are included in Maltese society.
Michael De Battista, who is a lecturer at the Malta Leadership Institute, mostly in the area of facilitating inclusive education. He has considerable experience in the disability sector. This discussion will be led by Marica Gatt. Marica is the head of the Primary Education Resource Centre in Malta and a visiting lecturer at the University of Malta. Marica's research area focuses on augmentative and alternative communication use.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for this opportunity. I think we had a really interesting day today, especially with Inka's presentation. I think it was really empowering and uplifting. And I think we should take the discussion immediately and ask Samantha a couple of questions. So what do you think the barriers are in implementing digital accessibility, in your opinion?
First of all, I think, yes, Inka's presentation was very interesting, but I would like to take a step back because we kind of assume that everyone understands what disability is, and maybe here we have an audience whose sector, I mean, we're experts in our sector, you know, we experience it, but you didn't focus your studies or your career on disability, and unless you experience it, sometimes it's difficult to understand because we have a lot of perceptions, like in any area, really and truly. So when it comes to disability, there are two models for disability. One is the medical model and the other is the social model. And more recently, we started adopting the social model much further, and the UN Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disability enforces that. Malta has signed and ratified this convention, and we are also, CRPD is the regulatory body monitoring that, and it was also transposed in our legislation recently, so this year. What we have to understand the difference between both models is that the medical model focuses on the impairment of the person. So Inka was mentioning quite a number of conditions and impairments, but what is really disabling is the environment that we are surrounded by. So if you and I were both put in a vacuum, sitting or standing or whatever, and there is nothing else to do, probably my visual impairment wouldn't really impact me. But if we are living here in a society where we're doing different things, obviously the impairment would impact you because society, unfortunately, still considers disability as an afterthought when planning. What Inka was interestingly talking about when we are designing and implementing initiatives or projects which are accessible for all is the concept of universal design. So universal design is when you don't think of disability as an afterthought, and I think, going back to your question, that is one of the biggest barriers, that unfortunately it is an afterthought. And I'm not saying this about the digital field only, but in general, yes, it is. One or two observations, actually, with regards to how disability was empowered or a barrier was created during this conference. I'm aware that we have sign language interpreters and we had throughout the conference, so that enables a person who is watching online to actually access the conversation or participate because of the sign language interpreter, and that is removing the societal barrier. However, another observation was that at least one of the videos had music, background music, had words on the video and pictures. However, there was no speech in that. So for a person who has a visual impairment, then that's not accessible. So these are different examples. I think one of the things we don't talk about in our field, but in general, is how technology has enabled, for example, persons who are mute to speak basically through text. And I don't think we ever mentioned that really, but I think it's a very interesting way of thinking about. It's again, it wasn't intentional. So keyboards weren't created for mute persons to actually communicate. However, that was the impact of it. So there are different ways of how we can include persons with disability. However, the biggest and most challenging thing to do is actually to think about persons with disability. Inka also mentioned that it's important to include persons with disability in personas and user interfaces. I say how important diversity is when it comes to consultation. So any form of consultation, whether we're doing policy consultation, whether we're doing consultation about interfaces and about different projects that are being done on a technological level in the technological sector, I think diversity is key.
Okay. Do you think funding should be available so that developers can make a website more accessible?
I think we have to think of accessibility and inclusion as in a bigger way. So honestly, I'm not one who thinks that the disability sector or everyone has to be funded and we should be ditching out money to everyone because there is disability involved. Rather, I think we have to think strategically, and there are so many obligations that the business sector, that NGOs comply to, and they oblige to. Somehow, when it comes to disability, we think that funding is necessary. When we're talking about statistics, so in Malta we have around 21,000 persons with disability who are registered with the CRPD.
That's a voluntary register.
It's a voluntary register, and again, referring back to Inka, a lot of people do not identify as persons with disability and do not register to such registers. So there's that, and in the EU, we have 87, so the European Commission recognizes 87 million members, and we were talking about e-commerce earlier and the single market, and when we're talking about that, it's an opportunity. So we shouldn't be talking about accessibility as something which makes sense just for the persons with disability or their family and friends, but it's an opportunity for the market itself. When we're talking about 87 million in the single market, we're talking about trillions of euros, which can be generated from disposable income that persons with disability have. And again, persons with disability, we're not interested only, sorry, I was switching to Maltese. We're not interested only in services specifically related to persons with disability. We're interested in, we have a life. So we're interested in going out, in games, online and social media. We're interested in all of it. And you have also persons with disability who are specifically interested in the tech industry. So there are a lot of opportunities.
Okay, thank you. Stanley, I would like to ask you a couple of questions. So what's the experience of Fita with regards to website and mobile app assessment?
Well, as part of one of our services is actually the assessment and evaluation of websites, both government and corporate websites and apps to make sure to issue reports and help the owners make sure that the websites are accessible. Strictly speaking, there's much more awareness nowadays. Back in the day, it was just a set of WCAG guidelines, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, where the entities were encouraged to adopt more accessible measures to reach out to the extra 10% of the population who have some form of disability, including the number grows if you include the elderly as well. Nowadays, there are standards. So, and it's a legal obligation for public entities in the EU. So the awareness naturally has grown among the owners of these different resources. The type of issues we come across, they're basically the same. I mean, the previous presentation by Inka, I think it's a very good starting point for anyone wishing to start implementing accessibility across their online resources. It can work as a sort of a checklist. Strictly speaking, you've got the very basics, which will include structuring, like any document, structuring your content with headings and making sure that for every form of multimedia content, a picture or a video, there's equivalent text, representation of it, meaningful text, not, which is, again, this is something we'll come across, image 1, image 2, image 3, image 4, or the path to where the resource lies within a database. Apart from the developer, very few people will understand what that means. So those are the common errors, but again, through the iterations and the work we've done with MCA, the awareness is increasing, so that type of error is being eliminated progressively. I think the biggest enemy of the owners for these resources at the moment is website overlays, which is those type of tools. There's a market, the markets develop where there are these sort of gaps. There are these types of tools where you've got your website and you're promised that with just by installing a plugin or a widget, you've got this fancy disability icon, you click on it and it gives you color contrast and large fonts, like it makes it accessible by magic. I think the easiest comparison I can draw is like someone, and instead of following basic hygiene before going out, they put on a lot of perfume. It works out exactly the same, and the experience, especially to others, is the same. They will remember it. You've promised your website would be accessible, and it results in a totally inaccessible website. What I mean by this is, the rules for implementing accessibility, they're quite simple. I'm biased because it's my daily bread, I do it all the time, okay? But it's a set of rules. You learn how to implement them in one page of your website. With dynamic websites, it's easier because it does copies across. But it's the same rules, and you learn the principles, and you apply them. And that's why I am a strong believer that content managers should receive training in that area, because they can upload information which is not accessible every day.
So you do agree that there should be some kind of training for web developers?
I believe so, that entities should invest in basic training. You don't need experts on accessibility in-house necessarily, but for the basic knowledge of I'm putting on a video, I'm uploading an image, there's an alt text box field, even the content management tools nowadays and the development tools, they are all mostly accessible. They just ask you insert information, but you're free to skip it, not to leave it out, and that's the problem. And those, going back to the overlays, basically, instead of telling you, listen, there are these short set of rules, and you implement them with a bit of diligence, and no problem, you're sorted out 90% of the issues and possibly more, if not all. No, instead it gives you this button, which it promises miracles. And to our experience, through our experience, it does not work. Plus, like any developer will know, like any other plugin or widget, it has compatibility problems, updating problems, conflicts, like any other plugin. So unfortunately, we're seeing a big increase in their use, but people will eventually learn that they don't work.
Okay, thank you, Stanley. There's Giuseppe with us. Good afternoon, Giuseppe.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel. I can only echo like what my colleague just say about like overlays and this type of activity that people are rushed sometimes to do in order to just like, okay, we need to make our website accessible. So let's go there and find the first solution that might allows us to get something in place for the regulation or for like just covering the real issues. The W3C has been pretty clear on the framework that we need to implement every time we want to have like this process of accessibility that I like to call accessibility by default. And as Inka also mentioned during her intervention, is like a clear framework of people and collaboration between like automatic check that can be done, the manual check that needs to be done by, of course, like experts, and of course also like involving like the people with disabilities in order to find every type of issues that there is like over there. I think also that having the explosion of this type of solution of overlays, it might also be related with something that we are already discussing. There is like the knowledge that need to be around accessibility and how good it is like for in general for the business, but also like for people itself has to increase. And as a players, we need to, of course, to start promoting and trying to facilitate the way that people can access to this information on how to make accessibility by default for every type of action they're doing while they are like in digital or also like if they are like in the physical world.
Do you see any major innovations that could be introduced?
I mean, we are seeing like on a daily basis innovation. Most of the people say that the accessibility drives innovation. Think about what happened like with audiobooks back in the days, or think about like the simple instrument that we're using almost every day, WhatsApp, with the vocal message. I mean, accessibility is driving innovation, and also the fact that in the last 2 years we have been like we have been also put in lockdown, which means that we have to everyone has to stay home and start working and start producing and start doing everything from home. It's creating like this type of innovation that then are immediately available for the people to use. Even the instrument Zoom that we are using at the moment, they are just creating and implementing like transcription on the videos in order to be more inclusive. Innovation are happening also, let's say, if we think about iPad that now can be controlled by eye tracking. I mean, it's something that really, it's amazed me the way that these last 5 years have speed up the process and also like probably put ourselves in a really good position, because now people are expecting that everything is like digital and everything is accessible. So it forced like a lot of companies to empower themselves and empower their customers in order to be available. And it was like also research from Gartner itself that say that company that will have like a full accessible and digital accessible environment by 2023, they will have like a 50% of competitive advantage to all the other companies that are not like following those rules. So it's from us to find and to facilitate the way that we can share this type of new technologies and how we can put this technology in the hand of people that they can increase the level of digital accessibility all around.
And what about costings when you come to sort of develop this kind of project, and what kind of costings are involved?
There are like, I mean, it depends when we take like if we're going for a remediation, right? The type of costing that we might have, it can be like 20 times higher on what if we take this level from the beginning, which means that if as a company, we're just like want from our technological partner, from like the people that are working with us, to have in place those kind of rules that are like set by the W3C and by WCAJ, but also like by the new regulation that will come in place by 2025 from the European Union, the cost will be like marginal in the way that we are like creating and projecting the type of website or digital access that we have in place. And of course, it will also untape the potential that was mentioned just before about like 87 million additional customers that otherwise is just like the missed opportunity that you're going to have while you are creating your digital asset. Because how are you going to explain that in terms of return on investment that you from the start, if you're not thinking about accessibility, you're basically say, okay, I'm just excluding a huge part of the market because I might have no the capabilities or I'm in a rush of doing something. So it's just a matter, instead of thinking about cost, it's like about how we really want to enable and create the opportunity for us to be present in the market and to provide the services that people are expecting from us with the inclusivity and in 2022.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. Michael, Giuseppe mentioned the pandemic.
Yes.
What do you think was the effect of COVID-19 on disabled persons?
To answer to your question, I shall be drawing insights both from personal experiences and other matters, which include observations from my part and also from academic material. When it comes to experiences by persons with disability during COVID-19, particularly during lockdowns, the experiences varied, at least in part. It reflects the fact that persons with disability are not a homogeneous group, in the sense that heterogeneity arises not only in terms of the nature and severity of the impairment, but also due to other factors which include affluence. It also includes education and other matters which include the extent of support by significant others, just to mention a few. Now, when it comes to COVID-19 pandemic, there were a number of pluses when it comes to access of technology. With this, I'm specifically referring when it comes to remote teaching and learning. Studies show that remote learning and teaching is a viable tool, even when it comes to various persons with disability. I can attest to this myself. First and foremost, last in April 2020, I delivered a presentation of my proposed thesis, and this thanks to a digital communication medium. Furthermore, starting from June this year, I also managed to deliver a number of lectures in my capacity as lecturer at the Malta Leadership Institute. And I was able to do this from the comfort of my home. Now, when it comes to issues, as a matter of fact, one should acknowledge that a number of issues were experienced by persons with disability during COVID-19. At least one of the factors was due to inherent issues that already existed before the COVID-19 pandemic. Just to give you a couple of examples. First, when it comes to web accessibility, as a matter of fact, a number of presenters have elaborated in quite detail on this topic. This also extends when it comes to accessing smartphone apps, in the sense that you would have, for example, buttons that are not properly labeled, and all you get is a response, button. But what is this button? Which could create frustrations. And of course, it might also lead to the abandonment of the app, which of course it could also hinder independent living for persons with disability. Another issue which I find very frustrating is the lack of Maltese synthesizer. Now, I mean, I started with the interview process for my for my thesis, and of course I prepared interview guides both in Maltese and English. I mean, using the Maltese version actually is practically impossible because of the lack of a Maltese voice synthesizer for my screen reader. And of course, what I had to do is to use the English version, then figure it out and translate it into Maltese. Now, when it comes to other issues, for example, which not necessarily due to the inherent inaccessibility of the websites themselves, but also other situations. Let's give an example. In my case, when we were in lockdown way back in March 2020, I was using a specific website to purchase food stuff, and due to restrictions concerning the deliveries, actually I was almost in a panic mode because I mean, I tried accessing other supermarkets, but a number of them had websites that were poorly designed, even when it comes to navigation or perhaps the labeling of the images or description of the products. And for a while, I had to rely on the grocery shop next. I mean, just a corner away. At least that mitigated certain concerns for me. I mean, this should be taken in the light of the fact that I am a single-person household, and of course, I had to do lots of stuff by myself.
So what are your recommendations? What could be the way forward from your experience?
Okay. Now, practically drawing on what Samantha in particular has mentioned, when designing technologies, be it websites, be it apps, the notion of accessibility should be from the ground up rather than a mere afterthought. It should be in such a way that that the technologies adhere to the concept of universal design, in the sense that the technology could be accessible to the maximum possible extent of people, including persons with disability. Now, when this all boils down to attitude, in the sense that if we see persons with disability as being the other, then chances are that people would start to, grumble about, designing technologies. They would see it as a burden, but at the same time, they forget that they would also lose opportunity, because there are millions of persons with disability around the world, and of course, if the technology is designed from the ground up, designed accessible, there are marketing opportunities, and of course, this could be beneficial both ways, both for persons with disability in order to purchase products, and of course for the sellers when it comes to business growth. Now, when it comes to technologies, persons with disability should be involved in every stage of the development of the products, particularly when it comes to technology, both when it comes to the conception and even when it comes to the evaluation stage, when the product or other form of technology is out there, and this could ensure that the technology is always accessible throughout its life cycle.
I think that is really, really inspiring. Thank you very much. I don't know if there's anybody who would like to ask the panel some questions. Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks.